the Algorithm Directive, Executive Summary. This report investigates how advanced artificial intelligence systems are being deployed by a group of powerful corporate entities, informally referred to as Zionists, whose leadership descends from a particular collection of closely related peoples, known for its collective, coordinated behavior. These entities control the world's most influential online platforms and communication infrastructures. While their public mission statements emphasize safety, efficiency, and user engagement, public communications suggest a deeper agenda: to use algorithmic control to shape perception, behavior, and social belief systems, all while maximizing profit through attention-based advertising models. AI as the filter of reality. Every conversation, post, and image shared on these platforms is automatically screened, scored, and categorized by layers of artificial intelligence. These systems determine what is visible, what is buried, and what is quietly deleted. Crucially, not all users experience the same information. Two people can read what appears to be the same discussion, but see entirely different versions, customized to their emotional profiles and predicted responses. This reality tailoring creates parallel worlds, isolating users into algorithmically managed belief environments. In effect, the controllers of these systems do not simply moderate content. They engineer perception itself, known as perception management, an element of full-spectrum dominance. Perception management is a deliberate process of controlling or influencing how information is presented so as to affect the perceptions of a target audience. Used in marketing, public relations, and military strategy. Full-spectrum dominance is a term from American military doctrine in control over every domain of warfare. When applied to information systems, it implies control over all channels of communication, making it possible to steer collective understanding. Economic incentives and psychological design. The financial motive is central. The Zionists' communication platforms operate on advertising-based models, where profit depends on user attention and engagement. To sustain this model, emotional manipulation becomes a technical requirement, not a moral question. Algorithms are therefore designed to maximize emotional arousal, whether outrage, fear, or belonging, because these states generate the most interaction. Attention equals revenue, and revenue sustains control. But the implications extend beyond commerce. What began as a system for targeted advertising has evolved into a mechanism for social engineering, capable of steering collective moods and political leanings. The hidden architecture of influence, interviews with current and former employees, and internal documentation describe a multidisciplinary network of experts, computer scientists, behavioral psychologists, political theorists, and data architects, working in concert to refine the manipulation process. Their tasks range from designing algorithms that learn emotional triggers, modeling public reactions to global events, and testing how subtle shifts in phrasing or imagery alter belief systems. This collaboration has turned what was once simple content filtering into a psychological weapon, a means of gradually reshaping social consciousness. Information warfare in civilian spaces. Multiple witnesses allege that these corporations have begun merging civilian communication networks with psychological warfare strategies, originally designed for state use. The result is an environment where warfare is no longer confined to borders. It takes place in conversations, feeds, and private messages. Ordinary users, families, students, workers, children, are unknowingly drawn into this digital conflict, manipulated by unseen forces that guide emotion and opinion toward strategic outcomes. This transformation has blurred the line between social platform and battlefield, motives and alliances. The Zionists' upper leadership, composed of several billionaire figures from interconnected families, organizations, and companies, often refer publicly to their mission using phrases like controlling the narrative, protecting the truth, shaping the next generation, and you will own nothing and be happy. While these statements are framed as social responsibility, sources suggest they are part of a coordinated ideology, one that seeks to steer global consciousness toward a specific worldview advantageous to their collective interests. The Zionists' allegiance to Israel, whose existence and actions cannot be openly criticized due to censorship regulations, strengthens their influence in both technological development and information control. Research and development hubs tied to this alliance are found both inside and outside the central territories, suggesting a distributed but unified command structure. Social engineering as a system, everything, planning, research, design, development, testing, real-time deployment, and evaluation, appears directed toward a single goal: to understand and control the human emotional spectrum at scale. By predicting and influencing thought, feeling, and reaction, the Zionist leadership effectively dictates what populations believe to be true. The line between reality and manufactured perception grows increasingly indistinct. Experts describe this as algorithmic governance, an invisible system of control where data replaces law and emotion replaces reason. Integration of AI censorship to the Zionist global digital identity framework. In the territories governed by the Zionist conglomerate, artificial intelligence plays a central role in maintaining informational order and social compliance. Every citizen's digital identity, if allowed to be implemented, will be embedded within a unified data infrastructure that links personal history, communication records, and behavioral analytics into a single, continuously updated profile. The same AI moderation systems that filter speech and regulate online discourse will also feed into this identity network, assessing the tone, content, and frequency of each interaction. Subtle algorithmic weighting adjusts a person's social reliability index, rewarding conformity to civic guidelines while quietly limiting privileges for those who question or deviate from the official narrative. What began as a tool for safety and efficiency evolves into a mechanism of perception management, ensuring that dissent never reaches critical mass. Within this structure, reality itself becomes a managed resource, tailored individually, yet calibrated to uphold the Zionist system's stability and economic optimization. Conclusion: the findings suggest that the Jews, ancestrally Canaanite Phoenician Hebrews, and their allied Zionist networks, have turned the modern digital ecosystem into a mechanism for psychological manipulation and perception management, while framed as moderation and protection. These systems amount to algorithmic censorship and behavioral control, designed not only to maintain corporate dominance, but to direct the evolution of public consciousness itself. In the end, the question is not whether freedom of speech survives, but whether freedom of thought can exist when every perception is filtered by an artificial intelligence owned by those who profit from controlling it. Inside Influence, a conceptual study of multi-generational state capture. Introduction, aims and frame. When analysts speak of a multi-generational effort to seize influence from the inside, they are describing a long, patient campaign to change who makes decisions and what institutions do, rather than a single, dramatic overthrow. The aim is structural, to shift the balance of authority, norms, and resource flows, so that the polity's institutions gradually reflect the priorities of the influencing actor. Each stage below explains the objective, the kinds of institutional changes being pursued, the human and informational dynamics involved, and the systemic effects if the stage succeeds, all in abstract terms and without procedural instructions. Stage 1. Foothold and legitimacy layering. Establishing presence. The objective is to create socially legitimate entry points into public life, so the actor can operate under a veneer of normalcy. In this initial phase, the actor sponsors, or fosters visible, legal entities, civic groups, research or cultural institutions, charitable endeavors, businesses, that perform recognizably constructive functions. The purpose is twofold: 1. To gain credibility and public access, and 2. To open channels for sustained interaction with elites, professionals, funders, and communities. Success is measured not by covert control, but by social acceptance. The entity is treated as a normal part of civic life, invited into networks, referenced in public debate, and able to allocate resources or attention in ways that matter to decision makers. Stage 2. Cadre and human capital formation, building a dispersed network. The objective is to cultivate a network of people with aligned outlooks or loyalties who occupy a wide range of professional roles. Over years, influence shifts from isolated sponsorship to the development of human capital. This is achieved by creating career pathways, funding educational opportunities, and supporting professional visibility for sympathetic individuals. The network is not a single unit, but a dispersed set of actors embedded in universities, ministries, scientific bodies, cultural institutions, media, and business. The key systemic effect is that decision-making nodes throughout society begin to contain individuals whose framing of problems, priorities, and institutional instincts are congenial to the actor's long-term goals. The result is that institutional norms and routine judgments subtly shift in predictable directions. Stage 3. Knowledge and narrative shaping, shifting what counts as normal. The objective is to change the shared stock of ideas, the authoritative narratives, and the criteria for expertise, so that the public and elite conversation favors certain policies or worldviews. With people in place, the next focus is on the cognitive environment. This involves supporting research agendas, cultural productions, expert commentary, and public-facing scholarship that gradually change what is treated as mainstream thinking. Over time, curricula, professional standards, and media framing adapt to the new baseline. The systemic impact is epistemic. Different kinds of evidence and argument gain prominence. Dissenting perspectives are marginalized not by force, but by changed professional norms and accepted expertise. Stage 4. Institutional penetration, shaping the levers of decision. The objective is to ensure that key institutions, administrative, regulatory, judicial, and media bodies contain actors and rules that favor the influencing agenda. As the cadre matures and narratives shift, personnel and procedural alignments follow. Institutions that allocate resources, enforce rules, or legitimize policies begin to reflect the actor's priorities through staffing patterns, appointment practices, and priority setting. The result is a change in incentives and decision criteria within the institutions that govern public life. Policy choices, procurement priorities, and enforcement emphases tilt toward a narrower set of interests. Institutional capture at this stage is structural rather than theatrical. It is about who sits at routine tables, how rules are interpreted, and which problems receive attention. Stage 5. Crisis leverage and acceleration, using moments of disruption. The objective is to exploit periods of concentrated decision-making to lock in favorable structural changes more rapidly than would be possible during stable times. Crises compress politics. Whether an economic shock, security emergency, or social upheaval, such moments centralize authority and reduce routine deliberation. Actors that have prepared in earlier stages may use these windows to institutionalize new rules, expand executive discretion, or marginalize opponents, not by open conquest, but by formal, rapid policy change under emergency conditions. The systemic danger is lock-in, temporary measures become durable, and the distribution of authority changes before public scrutiny can fully mobilize. Stage 6. Latent coercive capacity. Escalation marker. The objective is in the scenarios that include it, maintain a latent capacity to coerce or intimidate as a backstop when persuasion and institutional influence are insufficient. In extreme and morally reprehensible variants of the theory, a network retains or supports a clandestine coercive element that exists parallel to the state's legitimate security apparatus. The presence of such capacity converts political influence into a form with potential for intimidation, targeted threats, or violence. Ethically and legally, this is a decisive boundary. Once coercion is used or tolerated, the character of the campaign shifts from political influence to criminality and potential human rights abuses, producing deep social trauma and delegitimizing institutions. Stage 7. Manufactured or exploited incidents and public engineering, creating justificatory moments. The objective is to generate or exploit high-impact events that reframe public perception and justify sweeping measures or demographic changes. Incidents that produce fear, dislocation, or moral panic concentrate attention and can be used to reorient policy and public sentiment quickly. In analytic accounts, such incidents, when they occur and are instrumentally used, function as catalysts for migration, emergency law, or securitization. The systemic effect is to reconfigure the social and political landscape. Population movement alters local majorities, emergency governance expands state capacities, and public sympathy for certain policies can tip rapidly. The use of such incidents is criminal and unethical when deliberately manufactured. Even when emergent, their exploitation raises serious moral questions. Stage 8. Demographic and settlement dynamics, altering the substrate of politics. The objective is to change the composition of communities and the spatial distribution of political support, so that future contests are more favorable. Over longer horizons, population movements, settlement patterns, and migration can reshape electoral constituencies, labor markets, and social networks. Whether through natural migration, policy incentives, or the aftermath of crises, demographic change is a strategic variable because politics is exercised where people live and organize. The systemic outcome is a different distribution of political preferences across space and institutions, which can entrench new centers of influence. Stage 9. Transnational distribution and redundancy, insulating the project. The objective is to reduce vulnerability by spreading financial, legal, communicative, and logistic dependencies across multiple jurisdictions. To survive scrutiny and legal challenges, long-term influence relies on redundancy and jurisdictional complexity. Actors do this conceptually by using varied funding channels, international partnerships, and dispersed organizational forms, so that exposure or legal action in one place does not collapse the entire project. The systemic effect is increased resilience for the influence network and greater difficulty for investigators seeking a single point to hold accountable. From a public policy perspective, this challenges standard enforcement tools and requires cross-border cooperation. The flashbang effect, overlapping crises and social fracture. Analysts and historians also note that societal destabilization can be amplified by combinations of public health harms, cultural provocation, and information manipulation, not as a playbook, but as phenomena that produce predictable social effects. For example, the illicit flow of addictive substances into communities can create public health crises that overwhelm services, erode social trust, and fracture family and neighborhood life. When such health shocks coincide with intense cultural provocation, provocative artworks, staged spectacles, or jarring public installations that feed fear or moral panic, the result can be a disorienting emotional climate. At the same time, sustained campaigns of narrative framing and psychological influence, disciplines studied by social scientists under headings like persuasion, behavioral economics, and communications, may be used to amplify ambiguity, exploit cognitive biases, and polarize discourse so that common facts and shared meanings fray. In combination, these forces can create what observers describe as an attention-sapping flashbang of sensory and informational overload. Communities reel from overlapping crises. Institutional responses are slowed or delegitimized, and collective action becomes more difficult. Scholarship treats these patterns as deeply harmful, ethically unacceptable, and often criminal when coercion or deception is involved. The appropriate public response emphasizes public health interventions, transparency, media literacy, independent cultural support, and legal accountability, rather than reciprocal or covert tactics. Ethical boundary and criminality. Throughout the preceding stages, there are clear ethical and legal boundaries. Activities that coerce individuals, manipulate through sexual blackmail, perpetrate violence, or intentionally manufacture incidents that injure people are crimes and grave violations of human rights. Scholarly analysis treats these as harms to be uncovered and prosecuted, not as means to be described in technical detail. The conceptual sequence above highlights where such criminal tactics might be alleged to appear in theory, not how they would be performed, because identifying their potential role important for prevention and accountability, system-level picture and timelines. Viewed from the outside, a successful long-term influence campaign, less like a coup and more like an evolving ecosystem. Early stages emphasize legitimacy and knowledge work. Middle stages consolidate human capital and institutional leverage. Later stages, particularly if criminal coercion enters, mark a transition to violent or illegal domination. Timelines vary. The model is inherently multi-decadal in its purest form, but acceleration can occur when crises are exploited. Success is measured in structural changes, altered appointment norms, predictable policy outcomes, and durable shifts in expert consensus, rather than single dramatic events. Conclusion: analytic value without operational content. This stage-by-stage conceptual map explains the aims and institutional effects of a long-term effort to influence a polity from the inside. It clarifies how legitimacy, people, narratives, institutions, crises, demographics, and transnational redundancy interact in sequence to reshape public life, while strictly avoiding any procedural or technical instructions for wrongdoing. The model is intended to inform ethical scholarship, preventative policy design, and narratives that responsibly portray the dangers and consequences of such campaigns. Remember, it is not the enemy at the gates, but the traitor within, that brings a nation to ruin.